Good evening and welcome to The Late Show. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of June, 2020. And for this programme, we're going to be doing something a little different tonight. And we're going to have a theological and philosophical discussion on the difference between Christian persecution and anti-Semitism. And the reason I'm doing this is because one of our wonderful viewers, let me get his name right, Robert Craggs from Norfolk, sent in an email talking about the difference between Christian persecution and anti-Semitism. So I decided tonight to do a programme on it. Primarily, if we look into the issue of the differences between anti-Semitism and Christian discrimination. If we take Christians living in the West, that's you and I, and the vast majority of you, our viewers who are watching this programme tonight, is that you will face what is known as Christian discrimination, where you may be discriminated in your places of work, and we've had high-profile cases of where Christians have lost their jobs for praying for people at work, or for wearing a cross, or even for having a Bible on their desk. And also we know that Christians are politically marginalised. And the reason is because our societies in the West have moved so far away from our Judeo-Christian heritage that we're no longer sure that our society shares the same values as we do. And I'm talking about Bible-believing Christians here. And if we compare this to anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is not really the right word, the real word to use is Jew hatred, because it's hatred of the Jewish people and of the Jewish state, and therefore they face a violence. So there is a big difference between the two, but we both share our Judeo-Christian heritage. So to discuss these complex and important issues for both the Christian and Jewish communities in the West, I am joined by my good friend Robin Benson, and also my other good friend, Stephen Jaffe, who represents he's the co-chair of Northern Ireland Friends of Israel, as well as consultant to Magen David Adom. Gentlemen, welcome to The Late Show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
It's a pleasure. So, Robin, I'll start off with you. What is, in terms of your opinion, what do you think is the difference between Christian persecution and anti-Semitism, just to get the ball rolling tonight?
Well, Simon, when I got your sort of sheets for how the programme was going to unfold this evening earlier today, I sat down and really began to think about this seriously. And it's not an easy question to answer because it's a complex issue with lots of strands attached to both topics. But if we want to take it back to a theological or a biblical basis, then I think we have to go back to, literally, to the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and chapter 3 and verse 15, where post Adam and Eve's getting conned by the serpent, this picture of the adversary, Satan, the devil, whatever terminology you want to use. So that's the backstory. Then you get to Genesis 3:15, and God says to Adam and Eve and to the serpent, I will put enmity between you, that's the serpent, the adversary, and the woman, between your offspring or your seed, depends on your translation, and her offspring or seed. He will bruise or crush your head, and you will bruise his heel. So God's purpose in sending what someone has called the crushing one is to punish the adversary for what he's done and to set things right. And eventually, we know the story, God chooses the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people, in other words, to be the ones through whom this crushing one, they then become the target of the enemy of God as he tries to prevent the arrival of the crushing one. So you get the story of Egypt and the Exodus, Pharaoh trying to destroy all the males in the human race, or in the Jewish race. The Jewish people in slavery in Egypt. You've got the story of Haman and Esther during the Persian Empire. You've got Antiochus and the Maccabees. And then, more recently, at least within living memory probably of most of the folk who are watching the broadcast, you've got the Shoah or the Holocaust. And post-1948, you've got repeated Arab-Muslim attempts to destroy the modern nation-state of Israel since 1948. And behind these exterior threats and the conflicts lies this attempt to thwart the eternal purposes of the God of heaven. But another thread in this whole story is that God warned the Israelites at great length through Moses at Mount Sinai. You read it in Leviticus 26, it's repeated again in Deuteronomy 28, that if they did not keep the covenant they had made there at Sinai, that he would exile them from the promised land and discipline them severely in the lands he sent them to. And then within all of that, yet another strand, the persecution of the Jewish people by the Christian church. And I mean the church in the widest understanding of that word, either directly or indirectly, down through the centuries since about 300 AD. And then you look at the other side of the coin and you see that Gentile disciples of Jesus of Nazareth, again, there are many strands to the way they have been mistreated down through the centuries. I mean, the early disciples were persecuted by other groups in Judaism for all sorts of various reasons, some religious, some political. Sadly, in a small degree, it still happens today. Rome persecuted them for not bowing the knee to the emperor and the other Roman gods, not fitting in with Roman society. Islam comes on the scene. It's hostile. It's a belligerent ideology. And again, because they won't bow to their God, same as now, Christians get persecuted by Muslims. Christians are persecuted by Hindus and Buddhists because they've left their culture and their religion behind. That's increasingly being seen in India and across Southeast Asia. And of course, since the communist revolution in 1917, communism has had it in for both the Jewish community and the Christian community and other ethnic and religious minorities. However, as you pointed out sort of in your introduction, here in the Western world, we are, how can I put it, harassed because we go against the flow of an increasingly secular and rebellious, intolerant, anti-God society. And these are some of the, as I say, the complex strands that make up these two aspects of people groups being hounded for what they believe, how they worship, and the God that they declare their allegiance to, for want of a better expression.
And I want that was a great overview of historic overview, Robin, there of both Christian and Jewish relations throughout the centuries with a biblical foundation. I really want to bring you into this discussion now, Stephen, because you are one of the leading members of the Jewish community. You are loved and well known by so many evangelical Christians. They all love you because I know what kind of reception you get at speaking engagements. Before I discuss your kind of personal experience of dealing with anti-Semitism, do you want to reflect on what Robin has said?
Well, certainly, yes. I mean, it was an incredible overview that Robin gave in a very concise period of time, which was amazing. I mean, the biblical departure point for me, until I'd heard Robin's comments this evening, was always that portion which I know is extremely regarded by Christian Zionists, the part in the book of Genesis which talks about the blessings and the curses. Because I think many people in Gentile nations will say, well, that's great. All I've got to do is bless Israel and I will be blessed. But take it from the point of view of Israel and Abraham's descendants. God is telling them, you're going to be blessed and you're going to be cursed right throughout your history. That was the message to Abram right at the very dawn of the Hebrew nation, if you like. Your history is going to be one of people blessing you and cursing you. You don't deserve the blessings and you don't deserve the curses necessarily, but it's going to happen. So to me, that kind of sums up a lot of Jewish history in terms of experiences of persecution. And I'm sure we're going to discuss this evening that anti-Semitism is not a particularly Jewish issue. It's an impact. It has a huge impact on society as a whole. It's not confined to what the Jewish people do or don't do. Although I do take the point that Robin brought up. Yes, we are told that there are consequences if we do not keep the covenant relationship between the Jewish people and God as well. So yes, that is an aspect. But anti-Semitism, I believe, is supernatural thing. You cannot explain it entirely in rational terms. There is a supernatural aspect.
And this is a reminder to our viewers that we are live, we are interactive. So please share with us any experience you faced of facing either being persecuted or discriminated against because you're a Christian, or if you faced anti-Semitism itself, and that both are extremely ugly. I have to ask you, Stephen, you and I shared a platform, must be about coming up for 3 years ago, up in Coventry. And we were there at a regional, I think it was the West Midland Friends of Israel, both shared a platform to speak. And you got abused in the city centre because you actually wore a kippah, which is a skull cap, and were seen as being visibly Jewish. Can you share what it's like to actually experience anti-Semitic abuse because you're Jewish?
Well, that was, I think, quite unusual because it was anti-Semitism on the street. It doesn't happen to me that often. I would say twice a year, something like that. So it still has a capacity to shock when it happens. In the particular case that you're mentioning, a man, and he was no youngster. This is a middle-aged guy, white, English, said to me, "Hitler didn't kill enough of you lot." That was on the street in Coventry. Now, you're right, we had a fantastic meeting that evening in Coventry, so I don't want to say anything against the city of Coventry. It was a fantastic meeting we had that evening. But that was a very sharp experience of anti-Semitism on the street in the middle of the day. And that kind of verbal abuse is sadly not unknown. But a lot of the anti-Semitism that I encounter through my work, because I'm monitoring anti-Israel extremism on behalf of Jewish community organizations, and that kind of, I'm not talking about criticism of the Israeli government, I'm talking about a visceral hatred of Israel, and that often offends all decency, crosses over to crude, old-fashioned anti-Semitism in many cases. So I see it online a lot. Sadly, I've had to deal with cases of, for example, desecration of Jewish cemeteries, attacks on synagogues, on Jewish property. So it's shocking. It's on the increase. Statistics will show, produced by the Community Security Trust, which is a Jewish organization tasked with monitoring anti-Semitism and responding to it. The figures show that they're on a high, well over 1,000 incidents, reported incidents, I should say, a year. So it's happening in the UK, it's happening across Europe. In the United States, where the Jewish community felt very safe, we've seen violent and murderous anti-Semitism with attacks on worshippers in synagogues, and unfortunately many people murdered. So this, if you like, echoes what I'm sure we're going to talk about as well this evening, about the martyrdom of Christian communities across much of the world, facing violent persecution, which thank God we haven't seen in this country, in the UK. But the signs are there, the telltale signs of growing hatred, growing division, fear. We're seeing that so much at the moment in the current situation that we're in. So yeah, it is a topic relevant to us here in the UK, even if we haven't seen that kind of sharp, violent anti-Semitism or anti-Christian persecution, which tragically exists in other parts of the world.
Stephen, I just want to thank you so much for sharing what you shared there, because we are all appalled at Jew hatred, and it is irrational, it is disgusting, it is immoral, and especially the contribution that the Jewish people have given to humanity is just absolutely incredible, and that's something that should be celebrated. Robin, what is your response to what Stephen said about his own personal encounter with facing Jew hatred himself? And as Christians, we have a massive debt of gratitude that we owe the Jewish people. Firstly, for giving us the Bible, the 10 Commandments, which is the foundation of our entire legal system throughout the world. We have the Jewish people to thank for the patriarchs, for the prophets, for King David, the Psalms, and of course for us, Yeshua HaMashiach, our own Messiah, as well as the apostles and the entire New Testament. As Christians, don't we owe the Jewish people a debt of gratitude to stand up against this rise of Jew hatred? And according to the latest Community Security Trust statistics, 2019 was the highest on record.
Yeah, Simon, I just disgusted at the way Stephen, and I know other Jewish people are treated the same way, that should happen in this nation, you know, and when it was 2017, it's just unbelievable. And the fact that an organization like the CST, the Community Security Trust, has to exist to guard, protect Jewish schools, synagogues, Jewish community buildings. You know, we have to ask ourselves as a nation, what state have we slidden into that's the case, that even an organization like that has to even exist. And you know, as both you and Stephen have pointed out, you know, you try to explain these sorts of incidents and the uptick in Jew hatred incidents in this country in the last few years. You try to explain it morally, you try to explain it socially, you try to explain it politically, and you can pick and choose bits and pieces, but actually, as Stephen pointed out, there is no rational reason for any of it. None of it. Absolutely not. And you know, I come back to the point, and Stephen raised, you know, in his response to me earlier, this is at heart a spiritual issue. You know, and I go back to a lot of what I said in my opening remarks. It is a spiritually based issue. And when you actually sit down and ponder it and think it through, hatred of the Jewish people is a manifestation of rebellion and hatred against the God of Israel because of the things I said right at the beginning. The thing is that most people who behave this way, who, you know, put this stuff up on social media, who verbally attack Jewish people in the street, and worse, have no understanding that by their own choice, so they're not being let off the hook by what I'm saying, but by their own choice, they have actually sided with the adversary. They have sided with the enemy of God, and unbeknownst to them, they're actually doing his bidding. But it, as I say, it does not let them off the hook because they have chosen to adopt the attitudes that they have and display them the way that they do in the way that they respond to Israel, yes, but to local Jewish people that they encounter.
Right, I want to thank you for sending in your text messages and emails. I'm just going to read this one out from Martin, who says, hello, good evening to you all. I'm a trainee priest alongside of my priesthood at a monastery. I work at a call centre and I have a Bible at my desk, and I'm allowed to do that. That, in fact, there have been people whom said I could pray for their families and friends at this time. But apart from that, I've always been able to talk about my faith, wherever I've been or wherever I want to share with you. I think this is important to say this. God bless. And that's from Martin in Inverness, Scotland. So it's great to hear from you, Martin. And so pleased that you can share your faith with others. It's so important that we do that. This one says, put simply, I would say that that similarly, that anti-Semitism and persecution of born-again believers have, and that is the same spirit of Antichrist, is the same source of both forms of persecution. Satan hates the Jewish people and he hates the true church. I couldn't agree more. So let's have a look at this video that was actually produced that describes what anti-Semitism is, but let's call it by its proper name, Jew hatred.
Anti-Semitism is another word for hatred of Jews. It has existed for a very long time and still exists today. When Jews are verbally or physically abused, this is called anti-Semitism. The murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis during World War II is the most extreme example of anti-Semitism. But how did it come about? And how do you recognize anti-Semitism? But first, what makes a person Jewish? You are Jewish when you have a Jewish mother. Many Jews are religious, but there are several different movements within Judaism, and you can also be Jewish without believing in God. Many Jews see themselves as part of the Jewish people. Jews live all over the world. That has been the case for 2,000 years, ever since the Romans took the Jews into slavery and brought them to Rome in the year 70 AD. After this, Jews spread out all over the world. Jews are a small minority in many countries. Often they are farmers, traders, or laborers living together peacefully with the other people in the country. But often, Jews were forced to live separately, isolated from the rest. Sometimes they lived in a ghetto, a closed-off neighborhood within the city. During the Middle Ages, the era from the year 500 to 1500, Jews were also a minority in Europe. Most people in Europe were Christians, and they had little contact with Jews. Old prints showed that Jews were viewed as different, or that they were hated even. Christians did not like that the Jews had a different religion, and that they did not see Jesus as their Savior and the Son of God. Some Christians even saw Jews as the people who murdered Jesus. Jews also had different customs. That is why Jews were often discriminated against, and many professions were prohibited to Jews. But they were allowed to work in trade and finance. The negative image of Jews continued to exist beyond the Middle Ages. When a country was not doing well, negative stories about Jews started to appear. They were excluded and even persecuted. Because a small but visible group of Jews was working in trade or finance, they were accused of being power-hungry, causing all kinds of ghost stories about Jews to appear. These stories were handed down from generation to generation and became deeply rooted. During the 20s and 30s of the 20th century, Hitler and the Nazis used these old ghost stories. They made Jews into scapegoats. For example, Hitler accused Jews of being the cause of the economic crisis. Losing World War I was also their fault, according to Hitler. Hitler and the Nazis saw the world as a struggle between the human races. More and more people started to believe that Jews caused problems and that the Germanic people were better.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
In 1933, Hitler and the Nazis came to power in Germany. They took more and more measures to discriminate against Jews. For example, Jews were not allowed to marry other Germans anymore. People were also called upon not to buy from Jewish-owned shops anymore. In 1939, World War II started. Germany conquered country after country in Europe. In 1941, the Nazis decided to systematically persecute and kill all Jews in Europe. This is called the Holocaust, or the Shoah. And not only Jews, other groups like disabled, Roma and Sinti, and gay people were also persecuted. A total of 6 million Jews were killed. World War II ended in 1945. But anti-Semitism still exists. It shows up in different places, in different ways. Sometimes very openly, when people on the street are verbally or physically abused for looking Jewish, when Jewish cemeteries or places of prayer are vandalized, or when anti-Jewish slogans are chanted during soccer games. Hatred and prejudice against Jews can also be found online. For example, myths like Jews are secretly in power in many countries, Jews control the media, or Jews control the global financial markets. Myths and ghost stories that are from the Middle Ages and still exist today. Sometimes, it is unclear whether something is anti-Semitism or not. Lethal attacks on Jewish people are a clear case, but discussions about the Middle East or Israel are harder to judge. Some people make remarks that are obviously hateful against all Jews, but criticism on Israel is not always anti-Semitic. Prejudices, negative remarks, and extreme opinions can be offensive to Jews. They contribute to a negative image of all Jews and to the age-old ghost stories and myths. In short, Anti-Semitism has existed for a long time, and unfortunately, it still does.
And excellent video there was produced by Anne Frank's museum, talking about historical anti-Semitism as well as where we are now in terms of Jew hatred. Stephen, I want to come on to you because you have done so much to strengthen Jewish-Christian relations in the UK. And like I said before, you have so much support amongst so many evangelicals that love you and support the incredible work that you're doing. But what are your thoughts on Christian discrimination in the West and also the genocide that so many Christians face in the Middle East and throughout the world? And when we're talking about the Middle East, the Christians on the verge of being ethnically cleansed as the Jewish people were from the Middle East, and that took place in the late 1940s and early 1950s, around the time that the modern state of Israel was recreated on the 14th of May, 1948.
Well, I think those events are so closely connected. The expulsion of the Jews in the late 40s and 1950s from across the Arab world, and today's persecution of Christians and other minority groups, for instance, the Yazidis and others. Why do I think that they're connected? Well, a society that kicks out its Jews, as we've said, that anti-Semitism never ends by being against the Jews. It impacts on the wider society. And what the Arab world lost when it expelled the Jews from Iraq, where there was once well over 150,000 Jews. Today there's fewer than 10 Jews in Iraq. Or Yemen, where there was 40,000 Jews. Today there's fewer than 100. Right across North Africa and the Middle East, that expulsion impacted on the Arab world culturally, educationally, economically, and yes, spiritually. And once that is let out of the bag, well, these societies have experienced turmoil internally between Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, various ideologies, coups, instability, economic distress, and then right up to our own period, as you say, ethnic cleansing of Christians, physical expulsion, forced conversions, mass murder, all happening in our world today. Christians are being martyred in greater numbers now than perhaps any time in their history. That's not just in the Middle East, it's in Pakistan, it's in Korea, it's in China, persecution there. So this is an era of intense persecution. And it concerns me, Simon. It concerns me hugely as a Jew because we have been there. We know what it's like to try and convince the world to take action in the face of genocide and how difficult that can be. We have a media in this country which focuses on its own agenda and the stories that it wants to promote. To get other stories in there is very, very difficult, even when it is a matter of life and death for tens of thousands of people. And that is a challenge which I believe the Jewish community has to stand with its Christian neighbours and friends to give you the encouragement to speak out, to speak alongside you, and to ensure that we bring this issue of such pressing importance to the attention of our government, of our wider people. And I think so much more needs to be done, if I'm being honest.
Absolutely. Just going back to your text messages and emails, this is from Michael, who writes a kind of interesting email, which is, British, English or foreigner. Good evening, Simon and guests. Interesting programme. One thing I need to point out in this country, not just the Jews, but anyone who comes from another country to the UK, regardless of how long you've been here, you are a foreigner. You will never belong as one of the English community, and unlike America, you are an American. You are called an American regardless of where you're from. Michael, well, let's get this right. It's very difficult to define who is English, because if we go back the centuries, England is a melting pot. It's a mixture of Romans, Italians, Anglo-Saxons from Germany, French when the Normans come over here. So there isn't actually anything that described as being English. And your reference to Americans describe them as Americans, they don't. Americans describe themselves as American Italians, or American Jews, or American Poles, or American Germans, or American Brits. That's how they describe themselves. So you need to do a little bit more research, I think, from that one. This one is text message says, "Hi, Simon. Can't stand Jew hatred. On the back of the Black Lives Matter, how about organising similar protests under the banner Jewish Lives Matter? Why not? Surely the principle is identical." Great show, as always. Thanks, Simon. That's from Jeff. So I really appreciate that, Jeff. And, you know, we have to stand up against the rise of Jew hatred. And I think the Jewish community has done a brilliant job in calling out the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, and his party for failing to tackle the issue of anti-Semitism. I want to bring you back into this one, Robin, because after what Stephen said, particularly about the persecution that Christians are now facing in the Middle East and other places like North Korea and China, there is a big difference, isn't there, between our brothers and sisters here in the West who face that cultural marginalisation as Christians because we believe in the Bible, so therefore we no longer fit into this very secular, militant society that we're particularly seeing in Britain and in Europe merge, which is so far away from our Judeo-Christian heritage. But if you're a Christian in the Middle East or North Africa or China, you face almost a death penalty for being a Christian. Why don't we need to speak out more upon our fellow persecuted brothers and sisters that face so much persecution?
Well, you sort of answered the question, Simon. You know, in asking it.
I apologise.
No, it's okay. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. Because we divide the world into two halves. I mean, it's very generalizations. But you have the third world, or probably what better called the developing world, where still today, you know, as Stephen has already pointed out, you ultimately risk your life for being a disciple of Jesus. I mean, that is the nitty-gritty reality for many of our brothers and sisters in the Middle East, certain nations in Africa where there's a Muslim majority population. You move further east, as I already mentioned, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. You've got militant Hinduism on the rise in India. Again, you've got Islam in the other two nations. You move further east again into Southeast Asia, and you actually have Buddhist nationalism on the rise in certain Southeast Asian countries. Moving, you know, right out into the Pacific, again, you've got more Muslim nations. Indonesia springs to mind, Malaysia, and so on. And in all of these places, if you particularly are from the local population and have been brought up in the indigenous religion of the nation, and then move out of that and become a born-again believer, you literally are taking your life in your hands. Literally. You know, on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you certainly will be discriminated against in all sorts of ways, but you're literally laying your life on the line. Whereas here in the Western world, you know, New Zealand, Australia, North, South America, most of Europe, Scandinavia, at the moment, and I emphasize that, at the moment, who knows what's around the corner? You know, the things that we've seen here in the last 4 or 5 months, you know, we really have no idea what the future holds. But at the moment, you risk being, how can I put it, inconvenienced, harassed, maybe, but socially, culturally, economically, legally, your life will be made very difficult. But you won't be risking your life as a follower of Jesus. And that's the stark contrast between the world that we in this program and most of the folk who are watching it, you know, inhabit, And then you move out of the comfort of Western Europe and into the rest of the world, and it's a completely different story.
Absolutely. Let's have a look now at this excellent report that was put together by CBN that looks at the demise of Christianity in the West to be replaced by paganism.
More than 9 in 10 Christians who responded to a Premier Christian radio survey said they feel their faith is being marginalised by society. The State of the Faith survey also found that nearly half of respondents said they have personally experienced prejudice as a result of their faith, and over a quarter said they feel unable to be open about their beliefs in the workplace. The survey had almost 12,000 respondents. Peter Kerridge, Chief Executive of Premier Christian Radio, believes it shows that we are not the liberal, accepting society we think we are if we don't tolerate and accept everyone, including Christians, adding, people of faith from all religions should be allowed to live and work in freedom. Deputy Director for Public Affairs at the Christian Institute, Simon Calvert, said he was not surprised to hear Christians feel marginalised.
Well, in the kind of work that we do, the casework and the campaigns, this is what we find all the time, of course. People will know that we've been closely involved in supporting the MacArthur family in the Ashes Baking Company case, and that's just one example of Christian people simply trying to be faithful to a mainstream Christian position who found themselves under considerable pressure.
Martyrs Free Church in Edinburgh, part of the history of Christianity in Scotland. Today it's Frankenstein, which describes itself as both a family-friendly venue and a place for stag parties and bar-top dancers. This is St. Paul's Church in Bristol, England. It's now a school for circus performers. And in Linares, Spain, the Church of Santa Barbara is now Chaos Temple, a skateboard park. But before you get angry with the owners of Frankenstein, understand that Europe today has more empty church buildings than it knows what to do with, because Europe is by and large no longer Christian.
These are the remnants of a lost civilization, Christian civilization. It was once at the very heart of European life and culture. Those days are long gone.
Among the British, belief in the Christian God has plummeted.
The trajectory is very clear. Something like 70–75% of British under 30s say they have no religion.
Theologian Stephen Bullivant, author of Mass Exodus, says Europe's move away from Christianity is accelerating.
People often ask me, especially in the Catholic Church, it's kind of, what can we do to kind of bring everyone back, And half serious, I always say, well, invest in time machine technology.
The data is clear. Christianity in Europe is dying.
Dr. Harvey Kwiani, professor of African Christianity and theology at Liverpool Hope University, is from the Christian nation of Malawi. He says moving to what he calls Britain's pagan culture was a shock.
Growing up in Africa, growing up in Malawi, Christianity is exploding. The median age of an African Christian is 19. Coming to Europe, these are post-Christian people. They have moved away from Christianity. I teach students who will tell me I'm a third, fourth generation pagan in my family.
God is still moving in Europe, but the larger culture has been lost. And although some governments might still be officially Christian, they are now openly persecuting Christians.
What is hard for people in America to understand is that people in Great Britain really have no notion of what Christianity is.
Attorney Andrea Williams of Christian Concern in London spends much of her time defending clients like Christian Dr. David Makareth, who, because of his Christian beliefs, refused to call a transgender man a woman and was fired.
In essence, I'm now being compelled to say things which I cannot say. But when I'm told to call a man a woman or call a woman a man, they're pushing my conscience where it cannot go, because I could not serve my Saviour, the Lord Jesus Christ, and do that.
It's the same story for Christians across Europe. In Finland, a Christian member of parliament faces possible prison time for simply tweeting Bible verses that condemn homosexuality. And Bullivant warns it will probably get worse as Europe returns to its pagan roots.
At the end of that road culturally, I think, is probably 80–90% no religion.
And so to convince them to pay attention to Christianity again is a challenge.
Only a radical revival can change that. But if we don't, then it's going to get darker yet.
There is hope for Europe, and it could be in something missions leaders called the blessed reflex. It was the prayer of early missionaries like William Carey and David Livingstone that one day the gospel would return from the mission fields of Africa and Asia to re-evangelize Europe. And there are signs the blessed reflex has already begun. Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
And that gives us a kind of great understanding of the challenges that Christians face in Western Europe and Britain today as our nations move away from their Judeo-Christian heritage. I just want to read out a few more of your emails. This is from Kentra, who writes, all this hatred against the Jewish people is all led by the anti-Jewish media. The media are very powerful, and people are unthinking that they have kicked out God in their lives, so they have little understanding of history. People are being brainwashed, and I feel so sorry. So thank you for that one. And this one's an email, says, hi Simon, how are you? My husband and I are both Jewish, and we regularly watch the Middle East Report. Your show tonight is particularly relevant at this time. I'm on Twitter to stand up for Israel and to counter anti-Semitism. More recently, I've seen more and more vile posts in Twitter, and I've reported them to the CST and the charity Campaign for Anti-Semitism. The CST have been very quick to act on the more serious posts. Posts I've reported to Twitter have not always been taken down, and there seems to be a rather casual attitude towards the issue. Do your guests suggest we counteract anti-Semitism in public platforms like Twitter and Facebook? There seems to be a growing issue. Great show tonight. Regards, Dave and Miri. So thank you both for sending in that email, which is a very important issue. I think that's an important issue in itself, and in terms of how do we deal with social media and the rise of anti-Semitism. And this is where we see that some of the darkest places when it comes to Jew hatred is coming from social media. Stephen, I want to talk now about Jew hatred, and we have through this programme that Jew hatred is the world's oldest hatred. And a particular quote I want to give you from Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. It says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened, in the event of war, that they join our enemies and fight against us. So they go up out of this land. So we've had this, the story of Moses and how he delivered the people of Israel out of slavery and slavery in Egypt into the Promised Land. We have stories, for example, that Robin mentioned earlier, the book of Esther, where Haman tried to ethnically cleanse the entire Jewish people throughout the Persian Empire. We've had pogroms, we've had expulsions, we've had the Holocaust. What impact does this all have on the Jewish psyche, particularly as we remember 75, 80 years ago, the end of the show, in which over 6 million precious Jewish lives were murdered at the hands of the Nazis on an industrial scale.
So what is the psychological impact on the Jewish people? It's interesting because it's a community I live in, grew up in, and many things perhaps aren't said. But you referred, Simon, to the issues around Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and it's almost seems like ancient history now, but we're only talking about December when there was a general election in this country. It seems such a long time ago, when issues of anti-Semitism, which had been sort of suppressed, became headline news, mainstream political significance in our country, anti-Semitism. And there I heard from Jewish neighbours, family members, friends, people talking about, do we have a future in this country, meaning the UK? That's what people were thinking. They were facing up to the prospect that we would have a prime minister who was anti-Zionist to the core, who had, through his leadership, given, if you like, license for all sorts of people from the hard left, sometimes crudely anti-Semitic. We'd seen Jewish MPs in the Labour Party subjected to horrendous anti-Semitic abuse, with the leadership of the party turning a blind eye at best to it. So the question is, what is the impact of all of this? Well, I think it came to the fore then. I saw something that I had never seen in my lifetime, which was on the face of it, a very settled Jewish community, third generation, fourth generation, feeling, by the way, very British, contributing a lot to this country, feeling very integrated, having to come face to face with the idea that we could have anti-Semitism at the heart of government in this country. And that, I think, brought out the impact of centuries, really, of marginalization, persecution, and genocide 70 years ago. So yes, it has had an impact. And the answer I'm giving you now, I think, is a lot more clear in my mind than it was before the whole politics around Jeremy Corbyn, which brought lots of things, I think, to the surface in how Jews spoke to each other on Friday night dinners with their family around us, thinking, do we have a future here? Should we be prepared to leave this country? So I think that answers your question.
Stephen, I think it's very important. I had the opportunity a few years ago to interview the late Robert Rittstrich, one of the world leading experts and academics on the issue of Jew hatred. And he said something very profound that stuck with me ever since, that what starts with the Jewish people never ends with the Jewish people. In other words, if we as a society and as a nation allow anti-Semitism to go on without being challenged, then yes, this does hurt and does damage to the Jewish community in particular, but it also has a wider impact and also sows the seeds for our own society's destruction. How important is that concept in the fight and the battle against Jew hatred?
Well, it should be central. I mean, you started off previously with a quotation from the book of Exodus and Pharaoh trying to destroy the Jewish people. Look at the impact on Egypt. We hear about the plagues. It brings curse to the country. You mentioned the book of Esther and Persia. Well, if you look towards the end of the book of Esther, it doesn't hold back on the impact on the Persian people who were prepared to rise up and annihilate the Jewish community there. We've talked about the Nazi period, as you say, perhaps not in the lifetimes of every viewer, but certainly in their parents and grandparents, which brings disaster not just to the Jewish people, but to the entire Europe, brings the World War. Millions die beyond the 6 million who were murdered in the Shoah. So in each case, and I mentioned before about the Arab world expelling its Jewish population and its impact on them. So the point you're making is this has an impact on society. It is often, I think, the kind of the test, if you like. If there's something wrong in society, anti-Semitism comes to the fore. And the follow-on from that, which you suggested, Simon, is that it's not just a problem for the Jewish community to counter and face on its own. It really requires our friends in the wider community to stand with us because we're a small people. And I think this is a very important point. Globally, 14 million. In the UK, maybe 250,000. We're not the biggest community. We need our friends. And this is why you've spoken very kindly and generously about the work that I do in establishing friendship between Jews and Christians in this country. But that is vital. It's vital for the Jewish community as much as I believe it is beneficial to the Christian world that we stand together because anti-Semitism is most definitely capable of bringing a curse to an entire nation and entire societies. I've mentioned 4 or 5 examples. I could mention a lot more. So it is a pattern throughout history. And therefore, We need to stand together as Jews and Christians about anti-Semitism and also persecution against Christians around the world.
So we've got 5 minutes left of the programme, so kind of need to summarise, really. I'm just going to read out a couple more emails. This one says, "Hi, Simon. We were professional dancers aboard a luxury cruise ship and were ordered not to speak of our Christian faith. This was 16 years ago. We were always approached by people who knew we were believers and came to us. Our Christian Fellowship Bible group was really well attended, but we were told that the Christian thing had to stop and our next contract was withdrawn. The Lord allowed it to happen. We knew it was coming. Thank you so much, Simon, for all that you do for Revelation TV." And that's Brian and Angela. I'm sure that because of what you went through, the Lord would have replaced it with something so much better. So I have to ask you, Robin, because we're coming down to the end of the programme, why is it imperative that the Christians who have a theological and biblical understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people have to show that practically by standing with Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as we're seeing an unprecedented rise of Jew hatred around the world?
Well, I mean, there are several things that we can do. You and I have discussed these on previous programs, when I was working with Christian Friends of Israel. Earlier, I think it was Stephen touched, or you touched on the whole issue of today's social media. We mustn't let people away with Jew hatred on social media. I know it's very difficult sometimes to engage with folk, and sometimes you just have to stop arguing with them because some people won't, they won't stop arguing back. We mustn't let politicians away with it. We mustn't let the mass media away with it. And we certainly, as believers in Jesus, must not let the church away with it. So, for some of us, that means we need to get connected to organizations that take a stand against the hatred of the Jewish people in Israel. Whatever that organization is, and there are plenty Christian ministries, who will welcome support because they're looking for support so that they can stand themselves with the Jewish community. If you live in an area where there is a Jewish community, get to know them. Let them know. I mean, Stephen's already alluded to it. The Jewish community in this country for years has felt alone and beleaguered. And thankfully, there are ministries, Christian ministries, who have risen up to the challenge to get alongside them with no other agenda other than to show them the debt that we owe to them and our willingness to stand with them. And, of course, as believers in Jesus, we pray, meet with others to pray for Israel and the Jewish people. But I've said this many times on programs with you, Simon, praying is not enough. And in Judaism, it's more important to do something. Get up off your bottom and move around and do something that actually physically shows to the Jewish community that you are with them. It means taking a risk in some cases, but it's important.
Yeah. Robin, I just thank you so much. And Stephen, within 30 seconds, how important is it that the Christians stand with the Jewish community and with Israel at this time?
I think we stand together on the issues of Israel that we've discussed, issues on anti-Semitism, issues on Christian persecution around the world. Together, we will achieve more. I know that. And I want to thank you, Simon, for the platform tonight and so often that you give to the Jewish community and the issues that we face. And I believe things are really in a much better place than even 5 or 10 years ago in terms of Christians and Jews standing together in the UK, and we need to push this forward. So thank you for all that you do as well.
Pleasure. So I just want to thank my two very special guests tonight, both very good friends, both Robin and Stephen, for joining us tonight. And I want to thank you for watching The Late Show. As Christians, we can't stand by and see the rise of Jew hatred in our nations. And we also can't ignore the voices of those Christians being persecuted in the Middle East and elsewhere. So it's important that we make a stand. We can do that by praying, but we can also do that by taking action and being strong in our faith and our belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. So thank you so much for joining me on The Late Show. So shalom and God bless from me.